How did you become a professional dom? I mean, I think you're the only person I've ever met who goes by that title. So how did you end up becoming this version of yourself?
It relates back to that first question that you asked of like, who am I? I start. One thing that's always been present to who I am that hasn't changed is curiosity and thirst for awareness of myself and awareness for the universe around me. Like I really always cared about that. I was a curious kid. I had questions people couldn't answer. I got into spirituality. I got into personal development. That's always something that's been a part of what I've done, either professionally or just on a personal level. And through the course of, I think what tends to happen for me is I do certain work for myself because I have pain or suffering in my life I'm looking to remove. And as I do that and I found modalities that work for me, sometimes I want to integrate those modalities into what I do with others. And over time, I've sort of collected a really interesting group of different modalities. And why I speak a lot about being a professional dom these days, because it's the most recent modality that I've integrated into the work that I do. I don't think that's all that I do, but it is a big part of what I do. And I find that besides the fact that I think people are curious about kink these days, and there's sort of this like sexy factor to it, but one of the really beautiful things about kink is its ability to eradicate shame. Because kink is about taboos, and taboo is about taking something that was shameful for you and finding pleasure and turn on inside of it. And that's what kink is all about. And shame is one of the lowest resonating states that we can be in. So to transmute something that is that deep that I've personally struggled with feels really powerful, and that's what a dom does. So in some ways, I think it's one of the most beautiful types of work that you can do. I don't think every dom that does that consciously or intentionally per se, but I do think it's the modality that creates a beautiful space for that.
Yeah, I loved what you talked about the word shame. I noticed on the podcast you've been on and on your website, you mentioned shame a lot. I think you even used the phrase basically transforming shame into your superpower.
Yeah.
And how does kink or the work that you do outside of kink even transform somebody's shame into their superpower?
In the sense that it creates a radical self-acceptance of all of your parts. And you become more powerful as you collect these parts of you that you've sent into exile over time. These parts that we're ashamed of, we hide them, we mask them, we repress them. And every time you do something like that, it's a part of you. So you're cutting off a part of yourself. So the work of kink, of shadow work, of a lot of these types of modalities is going and collecting these pieces of yourself and reintegrating them into your life. And the more pieces you collect, you can think about it like in a video game, you're like collecting power-ups. You become a more powerful person. You become, those are your superpowers. Because now you have a collection of all these things that used to be the greatest weight that held you down, and now you have a radical self-acceptance and self-love of them. They work for you rather than against you. That's not just like canceling it out. That's like shifting the scale to the completely other direction.
Yeah, I love that analogy because I'm a huge video game nerd, and
Yeah.
it makes me immediately think of Metroid. I don't know if you played Metroid or not, but like
Right.
basically she starts off and like her suit is just kind of everywhere, right? There's all these pieces of her more or less scattered throughout the game, and then as you go through it, you basically start to rebuild yourself. And by the end, you're sort of back to the powers that you maybe started with, but even better. And it makes me think about that, like when you're integrating these different parts and pieces of yourself in this way. Um, I'm curious, like with that, when you talk about parts that are separated, what are some of these parts that are often separated that you're seeing, either within clients or within your own journey?
Yeah. I think one of the facets of ourself that we have the most shame over and then become most repressed are mostly things to do with sexuality, desire, those types of topics. We live in a reality where we're not really supposed to want. We're supposed to give. We're supposed to share. That's the good thing to do. And so then anything that becomes about creating something for yourself becomes either repressed or in a rebellious way becomes expressed in a more toxic way, where you go towards like greed and lust and gluttony, naming some of those deadly sins as they call them. But each of those things that has a beautiful side of it if it only gets integrated. Because when most people are acting out in those ways, they're not really acting from a place of acceptance. They're acting from a place of rebellion, which implies that they still think it's wrong. So we get to change our relationship to it, because when we're acting from a place of rebellion, we tend to be more reckless and about it and less aware in our actions. So we want to bring the integration brings more awareness back to those parts. So then the choices that we make come from a more expansive place with more vision and more power